The 70s were a fascinating time for country. You had the slick Nashville sound softening its edges into countrypolitan, the gritty outlaw movement kicking down doors, pop crossovers becoming more common than ever, and a solid bedrock of traditional honky-tonk still holding strong. It was a melting pot of sounds, and these artists were right in the thick of it, reflecting the changing times and emotions of everyday folks. Maybe their peak was a bit shorter. Maybe they didn't cross over as dramatically. Or maybe the sheer volume of amazing music from that decade just meant some inevitably got overshadowed. Whatever the reason, their contributions were significant, their hits were real, and they absolutely deserve another listen and a whole lot more credit. So let's dust off those vinyl records, or, fire up that streaming service, and pay tribute to 13 fantastic country artists from the 1970s who maybe don't get the shine they earned. Talk about a singer's singer. Gene Watson, often called the singer's singer, is pure, unadulterated, traditional country gold. While he started recording in the 60s, the mid-70s is where he truly hit his stride and became a reliable hitmaker. His voice, smooth as Tennessee whiskey, with incredible range and pinpoint control, capable of conveying deep heartbreak without ever overselling it. Think about songs like Love in the Hot Afternoon, 1975, his first major hit, or the Stone Cold classics Paper Rosie, 1977, and the devastatingly beautiful Farewell Party, 1978. Watson wasn't about gimmicks or trends. He was about delivering a song with impeccable phrasing and genuine emotion. He found that sweet spot between honky-tonk grit and polished delivery, maybe because he wasn't chasing pop crossover or aligning himself with the outlaw image. He sometimes gets overlooked in broad discussions of the decade. But for anyone who appreciates masterful country vocal performance and songs that stick to your ribs, Gene Watson was and remains top tier. He consistently charted throughout the late 70s and well into the 80s, proving his enduring appeal to core country fans. He deserves way more credit for being a standard-bearer of traditional country music during a decade of immense change. If you wanted unapologetic, beer-drinking, tear-jerking honky-tonk music in the 70s, Moe Bandy was your man. Teaming up often with producer Ray Baker, Bandy churned out hit after hit that celebrated, and sometimes lamented, the barroom lifestyle. He wasn't necessarily breaking new ground stylistically, but he perfected a specific kind of hardcore country that resonated deeply with working-class audiences. His voice had that perfect nasal twang, ideal for songs about cheating, drinking, and regret. Remember, I Just Started Hatin' Cheatin' Songs Today, 1974. Or the hilarious Bandy the Rodeo Clown, 1975. And how about the classic It Was Always So Easy, To Find an Unhappy Woman, 1976. Later in the decade, he'd team up with Joe Stampley for a successful run of duets, but his solo work in the mid-70s really defined him. Moe Bandy represented that slice of country music that never tried to be anything else. It was music for the dance floor, the dive bar, and the broken heart. He might get forgotten because he wasn't chasing trends, but for sheer honky-tonk authenticity in the 70s, Moe Bandy deserves a prominent place.
Oh, the Lord knows I'm drinking and running around.
Bursting onto the scene in 1972, Donna Fargo became an absolute sensation almost overnight, and she did it her way, writing her own massive hits. Think about the impact of The Happiest Girl in the Whole USA and Funny Face, both released that year. These weren't just country hits, they were huge pop crossover smashes, sunny, optimistic, and utterly infectious. Fargo's approachable girl-next-door persona and her knack for crafting catchy, relatable lyrics made her instantly beloved. She won the CMA Award for Female Vocalist of the Year in 1972 and a Grammy for Happiest Girl. She continued racking up hits throughout the mid-70s with songs like Superman, You Were Always There, and Little Girl Gone. Why is she sometimes forgotten? Perhaps because her biggest blockbusters were so concentrated in the early part of the decade, or maybe because her sunny sound contrasted with the growing outlaw and countrypolitan trends. She also faced health challenges later on. But Donna Fargo deserves immense credit, not just for her incredible early success, but for being a successful singer-songwriter in a time when that was less common for female country artists, paving the way for others with her relatable charm and undeniable talent.
I just want you to hear this from me. My world is better with you in it. My life is happier because you share it. And I'm so glad I have you all for my friends. I love you so much.
When you talk about unique sounds in 70s country, Gary Stewart has to be high on the list. He blended hardcore honky-tonk with a shot of southern rock energy and topped it off with this incredibly intense, vibrato-laden voice that was utterly distinctive. Stewart, often called the king of honky-tonk, brought a raw, almost desperate edge to his music. His breakthrough album, Out of Hand, 1975, is considered a masterpiece of the era, spawning hits like the boozy anthem Drinkin' Thing, the #1 smash, She's Actin' Single, I'm Drinkin' Doubles, and the title track. His music felt dangerous and exciting, perfectly suited for smoky barrooms and late-night regrets. He captured a wild energy that stood apart from both the slick Nashville sound and even some of the more calculated outlaw personas. Stewart's commercial peak wasn't as sustained as some others, and his sound was perhaps too raw for massive pop crossover, which might contribute to him being overlooked. Personal struggles also impacted his career later on, but for embodying that wild, southern-fried, rock-infused, honky-tonk spirit of the 70s, Gary Stewart was an absolute force and deserves far more recognition as a true original. Sammi Smith possesses one of the most iconic voices associated with a single song, yet her broader career often gets overlooked. Of course, everyone knows Help Me Make It Through the Night.
Help me make it through the night.
Written by Chris Christopherson, Smith's sultry, intimate 1970 recording became a monumental crossover hit, winning her a Grammy and topping both country and pop charts. It was a defining moment of the early 70s, perfectly capturing the burgeoning maturity and sensuality entering country music. But Sammi Smith was far more than a one-hit wonder. She continued to chart consistently throughout the early and mid-70s with songs like Then You Walk In, I've Gotta Have You, and Today I Started Loving You Again. Her voice was smoky, emotive, and conveyed a world weariness that felt authentic. She aligned herself somewhat with the outlaw movement, even moving to Austin for a time, seeking more artistic freedom. Perhaps because her biggest hit was so massive, it overshadowed the rest of her solid body of work from the decade. Or maybe her association with the Outlaws, without quite reaching the fame level of Willie or Waylon, left her in a slightly less remembered category. Regardless, Sammi Smith was a key figure in bridging countrypolitan smoothness with a more liberated adult perspective in the 70s, and her signature hit remains timeless. She deserves credit for her entire decade's output. With her bluesy, powerful voice and a knack for picking songs that resonated with female resilience and heartache, Billie Jo Spears carved out a very successful niche in the 1970s. While she'd had success before, most notably 1969's Mr. Walker, It's All Over, it was 1975's Blanket on the Ground that became her signature smash, hitting #1 in the US and becoming a massive international hit, especially in the UK. That song perfectly captured her appeal, a strong female perspective delivered with soulful honesty. She followed it up with a string of hits that often dealt with themes of love, loss, and independence, like What I've Got in Mind, 1976, 57 Chevrolet, 1977, and If You Want Me, 1977. Spears had a husky, lived-in quality to her voice that made her instantly recognizable. She wasn't afraid to tackle slightly more risque or emotionally complex themes. Maybe she's sometimes overlooked because her biggest U.S. chart success was concentrated in the mid to late 70s, or because her international fame perhaps outstripped her consistent U.S. superstardom compared to the absolute biggest names. But Billie Jo Spears was a vital female voice in 70s country, delivering blues-tinged hits with grit and grace, and she deserves to be remembered for more than just her biggest hit. Johnny Rodriguez brought a youthful energy and a smooth, romantic vocal style to country music in the early 70s, becoming one of the genre's first prominent Hispanic stars. Discovered by Tom T. Hall, Rodriguez quickly racked up an impressive string of 15 consecutive top 10 hits, starting in 1972. His debut single, Pass Me By, If You're Only Passing Through, went straight into the top 10, followed by number ones like You Always Come Back, To Hurting Me, Riding My Thumb to Mexico, That's the Way Love Goes, and Just Get Up and Close the Door. His music often blended traditional country sounds with subtle Latin influences and a smooth, almost crooner-like delivery that appealed to a wide audience. He was young, good-looking, and charismatic, a fresh face on the scene. While he remained a popular artist, his chart dominance softened slightly in the latter half of the decade, and he faced some legal troubles later in his life, which might have impacted his legacy. However, his incredible run in the first half of the 70s was phenomenal. Johnny Rodriguez deserves significant credit for breaking barriers and for bringing a distinctively smooth and romantic sound to the forefront of country music during that era. Freddy Fender's story is one of incredible comeback and unique cultural blending. Baldemar Huerta, his real name, had minor rock and roll success in the late 50s, before legal troubles derailed his career. Then, in the mid-70s, working with legendary producer Huey P. Moe, Fender roared back onto the scene with a sound that fused country, swamp pop, rock, and roll, and Tejano influences. His 1975 bilingual smash, Before the Next Teardrop Falls, was a phenomenon, topping both the country and pop charts. He followed it immediately with another number one country and top 5 pop hit, Wasted Days and Wasted Nights, a re-recording of his own 1960 song. His tremolo-heavy voice and that distinctive Tex-Mex sound were instantly recognizable. He continued his streak with hits like Secret Love and You'll Lose a Good Thing. Fender's success proved the appeal of blending cultural sounds and brought Tejano-influenced music to a massive mainstream audience. He might be sometimes pigeonholed by his biggest hits or seen as a mid-decade phenomenon, but Freddy Fender's impact was huge. He deserves immense credit for his unique artistry, his incredible comeback story, and for broadening the sonic palette of country radio in the 70s. Mel Street possessed one of the purest, most emotionally resonant country voices of the 1970s, steeped in the tradition of honky-tonk heartache. He arrived on the national scene in 1972 with the top 10 hit Borrowed Angel, showcasing his smooth yet powerful vocals and knack for delivering a tearjerker. He followed up with hits like Lovin' on Backstreets, Smoky Mountain Memories, and If I Had a Cheatin' Heart. Street's music was classic country, focusing on themes of love, loss, and infidelity, delivered with an aching sincerity that connected deeply with fans of traditional country. His voice had a rich baritone quality that could convey profound sadness. Tragically, Mel Street's story ended far too soon. He died by suicide on his 43rd birthday in 1978, cutting short a career that seemed poised for continued success. Perhaps due to the tragic brevity of his time in the spotlight, he isn't always mentioned alongside the decade's mainstays. But for fans of pure, traditional country singing, Mel Street was exceptional. He left behind a legacy of beautifully sung heartache anthems and deserves to be remembered as one of the finest traditional voices of the 70s. Joe Stampley brought a sense of fun and Louisiana swagger to 70s country music. Before his country success, he'd fronted the rock group The Uniques. In the early 70s, he transitioned to country and quickly found his footing with playful, sometimes slightly suggestive, honky-tonk numbers. His first number one hit came in 1973 with Soul Song, followed by catchy tunes like Roll on Big Mama, 1975, and All These Things, 1976, which showcased his energetic delivery and swamp pop influences. Stampley had a knack for choosing material that was both country to the core and incredibly infectious. Later in the decade, he found massive success teaming up with Moe Bandy for a series of novelty duets like Just Good Old Boys and Holding the Bag, which further cemented his place, but perhaps slightly overshadowed his solid solo work from earlier in the 70s. Maybe his later success as part of a duo or his more lighthearted material causes him to be slightly overlooked as a solo force from that era. But Joe Stampley was a consistent hitmaker with a distinct Louisiana flavor, bringing a rollicking energy to the country charts throughout the decade. He deserves credit for his solo contributions and for injecting a dose of fun into the genre. Often dubbed the Tennessee Yodeler, Margo Smith brought a unique vocal talent and a touch of glamour to the country music scene in the latter half of the 1970s. After years as a school teacher, she pursued her musical dreams and broke through in 1975. Her clear, bright voice was perfectly suited for both heartfelt ballads and more up-tempo numbers, but it was her impressive yodeling ability that often set her apart. She scored 2 number-1 hits in 1978, the playful Don't Break the Heart That Loves You, a remake of Connie Francis's pop hit, and the charming It Only Hurts for a Little While, originally by the Ames Brothers. Both showcased her vocal clarity and incorporated her signature yodel tastefully. She also had hits with Little Things Mean a Lot and Still a Woman. Maybe because her peak chart success was concentrated in the late 70s, or because yodeling might be seen as more of a novelty by some, she doesn't always get the historical spotlight. But Margo Smith was a talented vocalist and performer who achieved significant success with a distinct style. She deserves credit for bringing her unique talents, including that impressive yodel, to the top of the country charts. Razzy Bailey brought a distinctive bluesy R and B inflected sound to country music, particularly finding his groove in the late 1970s. Though he'd been writing songs for others for years, his own recording career took off around 1978. His vocals were smooth yet soulful, and his music often featured groovy bass lines and a relaxed, almost swampy feel, sometimes referred to as Dickie Lee Soul or Bayou Country. He scored a string of 5 consecutive number-1 country hits, starting in late 1980, but his chart presence began building significantly in the late 70s with songs like What Time Do You Have to Be Back to Heaven, 1978, and Tonight She's Gonna Love Me, Like There Was No Tomorrow, 1979. His sound was different, less twangy than hardcore country, less polished than countrypolitan, sitting comfortably in a soulful middle ground. Perhaps because his biggest run of hits bled into the early 80s, his 70s contributions get a bit overshadowed. But Razzy Bailey was already establishing his unique, blues-drenched country sound before the decade turned, offering a refreshing alternative on the airwaves. He deserves credit for bringing that soulful flavor to the genre during the late 70s. Okay, hear me out on this one. Jeannie C. Riley absolutely exploded onto the scene in 1968 with the iconic, controversial, Grammy-winning crossover smash, Harper Valley PTA. That song, a narrative powerhouse written by Tom T. Hall, made her an overnight superstar. Now, while her biggest hit predates the 70s, Riley remained a consistent presence on the country charts throughout the early part of the decade. She continued to release singles like The Girl Most Likely, There Never Was a Time, Oh Singer, and Good Enough to Be Your Wife, all of which performed respectably. She maintained the sassy, independent persona established by Harper Valley, even if none of her subsequent songs reached quite the same stratospheric heights. Why forgotten? Because Harper Valley PTA was so massive, a true cultural moment, that it inevitably overshadows everything else she did. Her image tied to the miniskirts and go-go boots of the late 60s also sometimes freezes her in that specific moment. But Jeannie C. Riley deserves credit for navigating the country music scene in the early 70s after having one of the biggest crossover hits of all time. She continued to make solid country music and maintained a chart presence, proving she was more than just a one-song phenomenon, even if that one song remains her towering legacy. If you made it this far, thanks for taking the time to revisit some of the overlooked voices that helped shape country music in the 70s. These artists may not always get the spotlight, but their songs left a mark. If you've got a favorite I didn't cover, or a story tied to any of these names, drop it in the comments. Hit subscribe if you want more deep dives like this, and if you're already thinking about digging through some old records or playlists, mission accomplished. See you in the next one.